Hey everyone, Alex from Shape Gaming here. Have you ever joined a Pug Mythic Plus dungeon expecting to have a fun time, only to be yelled at from the people in your group dying to mechanics or not playing their character correctly? I'm here with the video to tell you that it's not your fault. I wanted to switch it up from my most recent class-specific guides and take a look at Pug healing, especially with all the videos coming out about the lack of healers and how healing feels in Mythic Plus Season 2, in hopes to keep you all sticking to your healers knowing that Season 3 will be here sooner than you know it. Today we're going to look at how to identify whether or not player deaths, party wipes, and dungeon failures are your fault as a healer, or whether it's actually the fault of other individual players in your group. We'll take a look at an average key from a Mistweaver's point of view to see if we can identify whether the wipes are my fault as the healer or the other players themselves. My hope is that by helping you identify mistakes in the root cause, you can continue to improve your healing and fix mistakes while also understanding whether something is actually your fault or your team is just raging for no reason. Let me know if you find this sort of content helpful by hitting that like and subscribe button and leaving me any questions or comments below. Before we take a look at the dungeon run, let's identify a few things that you should be looking at when trying to understand whether something is your mistake as a healer. Ask yourself, did the player have defensive that they could have used to mitigate damage or their death, and did they use it? I would suggest downloading an add-on such as Zombie CD so that you can see what defensives each player has and whether or not they use them. Looking at player deaths, try to understand what killed the player and if it was a mechanic they could have dodged. For instance, the avalanche attack in Netharus Lair is a skill that often kills players, but it is a mechanic that can be dodged, whereas the pelters in Netharus Lair randomly target people, which is not something that can be avoided without a skill such as Blessing or Protection or Feign Death. This item is something that is related to us as healers and helps us understand if a death could have been prevented. If a player dies to an unavoidable mechanic, you need to be aware of whether or not you had a cooldown that you could have used. Remember that you should try to get in the hang of using your cooldowns preemptively rather than holding on to them the entire dungeon run. Another healer-oriented thing to look out for is how long it took you to begin triaging any damage. Often, you might find yourself not starting to heal until a player dips below 80%. Although this is not normally an issue with coordinated groups and many players in general, this can quickly turn into player deaths and pug situations. With some of those tips to look out for, let's take a look at this run to see if we can begin to identify if the player wipes in this key are really my fault. For context into this key, I was looking for a dungeon between a plus 15 and a plus 18, as I think that's where a lot of average healers or healers looking to get better find themselves stuck. This is also a key level range where I tend to see the most variation in group skill. I decided to play my Mistweaver Monk for this key since I've not spent a lot of time on the class over the past month or so and wanted to see how rusty I was. Please also keep in mind that my character outlevels this dungeon. Finally, this also happens to be arguably the best push week in that the FXs are Tyrannical, Volcanic, and Sanguine. I found a plus 17 Netharus and I'm running my standard Feline Stomp Mistweaving build. Taking a look at my group composition, we have a Fire Mage with a 2581 score, a Havoc Demon Hunter with a 2215 score, and a Beast Mastery Hunter with a 2244 score. Our Prot Warrior has a 2134 score. It's not a bad score overall, but I already have my doubts as he's only times 6 plus 15 keys. Most of these players are also eye level 435 or higher. The main concern I have is the Prot Warrior, but I'm feeling pretty good about the group comp. Okay, so as we get started here, I'm going to try to speed through the dungeon to parts where I'm actively healing and where we run into issues so that we can look at the root cause. Try to keep the list I went through earlier in mind during this run. So this first pack is pretty easy. The tank is pulling it into the next set of adds, which isn't a bad thing since this timer can be quite tight. Right here is where my concern with our tank comes in. If you notice, he's spending lots of time keeping the adds in Sanguine, thus healing them and slowing down our pulls. And you can see our mage is already frustrated. This is a common theme that you'll see throughout this dungeon where the tank is consistently keeping the adds on Sanguine puddles. One thing you'll see with my Mistweaver is that I'm sometimes not paying attention and spitting Crane Kick on packs less than 4. You normally want to be using Tiger Palm and Blackout Kicks on top of your Feline Stomp, as it's more efficient from a damage perspective and a mana return. Coming into the first boss, we're already in a good spot. I'm only a little over 50% mana trying to drink, and we just pull. Luckily, this boss isn't too healing intensive on this key level. On Tyrannical, you really only need to worry about 2 things. Dodge the charge and follow-up waves, and prepare a cooldown for the Volatile Mutation AoE attack. You notice right there how much damage the wave hits someone, and it forces me to use Life Cocoon. If everyone dodges the charges and waves, the healing is pretty light outside of the AoE Volatile Mutation. So there we have our first death. It's difficult to see with my camera angle being stuck up against the wall, but the Demon Hunter gets hit against the wall by a wave. If we look at this death is pretty easy to write off as a player's fault and not ours. The Demon Hunter should have dodged this mechanic instead of double jumping over it. If we look at my cooldowns, the only one that I really have that might have saved him is Life Cocoon. However, he's been knocked so far out of range that there isn't anything that I can do about it. You'll notice on this big pull that I'm not optimizing my Spirit of the Crane very well. I spend too much time sitting on an instant cast Enveloping Mist. It's important that you're casting those instant Enveloping Mist during Crane so that you can continue building towards the next cast to get as many in as possible. And we're again spending way too much time in Sanguine Puddles. So this next boss is more of a challenge on Tyrannical, especially in a Pug, because as a healer you most likely won't know when your team is going to break the spears and cause the damage events. The main things that you have to prepare for here is healing up the Dot from Dragon Strike and preparing your cooldown for the Grounding Spear. You'll notice my Hunter almost dies because I don't keep him topped off from the Dot as the Grounding Spear mechanic begins. Overall, the boss goes down fairly easy without too much stress. The next several mobs go fairly easy with normal damage events and healing. I make sure my tank knows to let me get mana on this boss, as I find it to be the hardest out of all four. This boss has an AoE attack that is pretty telegraphed. However, he also has two attacks that force you to dodge stuff on the ground, which makes healing difficult sometimes if you're unable to time a hard cast heal in between movement events. The stuff on the ground is also difficult to see on top of the red carpets and floor coloring. And we finally have our next death. So let's take a look at this one. The tank gets hit by the heated swing attacks and has about 62% HP. I have an Essence Font Renewing Mist hot up on him thinking that will be enough as I fist weave the remaining HP up. The tank doesn't get out of the AoE circle jump, drops to 18% and then dies on the next tick of damage. If we look at this, we see as far as cooldowns, the tank has Shield Wall and Rallying Cry, both of which probably would have saved him. From a healing perspective, the only cooldown I currently had up was Revival. Revival may have saved him, and I probably should have pressed it. However, if we look at our first 2 points, the tank didn't dodge an avoidable mechanic, one that he obviously knew about because he dodged the first round of it, and he had 2 defensives that he could have used to help mitigate the damage. At this point, we've unfortunately failed the key. We only have 8 minutes and 16 seconds left, and the run back alone will eat up several minutes. Our next attempt at the boss is successful. Luckily, the group wants to finish out the dungeon. We'll look at the last boss to discuss the healing mechanics, and because we have another teammate that dies. So for the final boss, this is another one that is fairly easy from a healing perspective, especially since Blizzard nerfed the Molten Gold debuff. Really, all you need to do is dodge the frontal cone, keep away from the fire elemental, keep the debuff player topped off, and have an item ready to burst his magma shield. The only way that you should really see a wipe on this boss is if your group doesn't burst the shield quickly enough. And with 1.5% of the boss left, our hunter takes 2 of the ground attacks to the face. He may have been able to save himself with Turtle. Had I seen him and not been blocked by my voodoo bars, I should have cast a Life Cocoon on him. So although it's completely the hunter's fault for dying, I probably could have prevented this one. Overall, this was a fairly average dungeon from what I typically experience with pugs. If we look at the key as a whole, I would say that we really only failed for 2 reasons. 1, the tank spent too much time with the ads in the Sanguine, which ate up time a few minutes across the entire dungeon, and number 2, the tank dying to the 3rd boss. If we look at my healing, we could say that of the 3 deaths, we could have prevented the hunter dying on the final boss. We couldn't have saved the demon hunter on the first boss due to him being way out of range, and our revival more than likely wouldn't have saved our tank from dying on the 3rd boss unless he had also used one of his defensives. there we have it. Again, I wanted to try to bring something new. I want to thank everybody that's been tuning into the content and recently subscribed. If you found this video helpful or would like to see others featuring different healing classes, let me know.